Hi, I'm Rick Chen, and my project is a meta-analysis on the relationship between hearing and dyslexia to achieve early diagnosis and treatment. Dyslexia is characterized by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition. Signs such as delayed speech and inability to recognize rhyming words are strong indicators of dyslexia and can be apparent at an early age. These can lead to problems in reading comprehension and vocabulary growth, hindering their early development. Dyslexia is distinguished by reading deficits present in a child with otherwise normal intellectual, imaginative, and emotional capacities. Disagreement exists around whether the deficits in dyslexic individuals are language-based or caused by more fundamental problems, such as auditory processing. It's also probable that dyslexia has a neurological foundation, where dyslexics have different brain structures in their speech processing centers. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what motivated me to pursue dyslexia as my area of interest. First is my little brother Andy, and he shows some signs of reading disability, so I wanted to choose a research area that could help me better understand his condition and support him. I also wanted to try something new. I wanted to explore a completely new subject that I hadn't learned much about. Our school almost has no classes in the area of social sciences, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn something new in that area through studying dyslexia. Without early and effective treatment, dyslexia can have serious long-term consequences. The psychological impacts of dyslexia are shown in Richardson and Weidel, with dyslexics having a much higher risk for depression, anxiety, and poor self-image. Humphrey and Mullins shows that higher education becomes an increasing challenge for dyslexics, cutting them off from hundreds of careers and thousands of dollars in future income. Thus, it's vitally important to address dyslexia with effective treatment, and early diagnosis is crucial to effective treatment, as shown with Snowley and MJ. Current research in the treatment and diagnosis of dyslexia focuses on a neurobiological viewpoint, broad spectrum of auditory deficits, and a relationship between auditory deficits and other effects of dyslexia. The brain areas associated with word and sound processing are examined with MRIs and EEG devices, such as in Norton 2016. The goal of research in this direction is to potentially establish brain imaging as a more accurate method of diagnosis. A number of auditory deficits are being investigated, such as intensity discrimination, rise time perception, and frequency discrimination. Hamalainen in 2014 is a great example of this, examining a broad spectrum of different auditory deficits. And finally, the relationship between auditory deficits and effects, such as rapid automatized naming, as seen in McWeeny 2021, are studied to see if there is a predictive relationship between them. A broader spectrum test incorporating some of these other factors could be greatly beneficial to future diagnosis, a main goal of this research direction. Hearing and dyslexia are possibly related to each other from previous studies, but more efforts are necessary to establish it as a reliable diagnosis tool. The purpose of this meta-analysis is to assess the association between auditory processing deficits and dyslexia. I investigate a specific property of hearing in this project, gap detection. The hypothesis investigated in this study is that reading impairments due to dyslexia are correlated with deficits in auditory gap detection. By focusing on one type of hearing tool and quantifying its viability, more accurate early identification procedures are created. For my project, I extracted data from 15 studies, screening thousands of studies to create this final sample. I used abstractor and snowball search software and study inclusion criteria to narrow it down. Now, the initial sample was taken from Hamalainen 2014, and this was a sample with 60 initial studies. And looking at the flow chart, I conduct a snowball search, giving 4,470 potentially relevant studies. And then I do an abstract screening, cutting it down to 845, which are then full-text screened to get 15 final studies. Now, this is in addition to the 60 studies that get the same full-text screening as this, giving finally 15 studies. Next, we have data extraction. I extracted data and entered them into the REDCap data logging software, which is essentially a server where I could enter in data points. And from effect sizes, I took the mean and standard deviation from both the dyslexic and control groups for each study. And for study measures, I took the task design and primary language. And for demographics, I took the age of the sample and the gender ratio, among others. And then finally, I assessed each study with the NIH study quality tool for possible bias, and this gave a final rating of poor, fair, or good for each study. So we start the results by looking at the Hedges-G test on the right. And this is a forest plot that shows the Hedges-G effect sizes for each individual study that we selected. And you can see that the effect sizes roughly go around the bottom one, which is the overall effect size. So it shows that they roughly coalesce around the overall effect size, showing that there's minimal variance except for the outlier over here. Now, these lines here are the confidence intervals, the 95% confidence intervals, and the one in the middle is the actual effect size. And if you look at task design over here, it's simply a study measures that we took, such as fusion is a study as a type of task, 2AFC is a type of task, and then age here is a demographic that we took, is a general age category of the sample in each study. Looking at extracted data, this table shows effect sizes, means, standard deviations, 95% confidence intervals, and study measures collected for each individual study. And you can see here these are the effect sizes shown in the previous forest plot, but quantified into numbers. And then here's the threshold values, and these two threshold values are used to determine this effect size using a Hedges G test. You can see the RD or dyslexic threshold value compared to the control threshold value. And you can find the difference there, or the effect size. And here's a confidence interval for the effect size, and then here's the age category. Of course, in categories of children, some are non-reported, adult, and an adolescent. And here's a robust variance estimation from the R script. So after entering in the code from before, we get these results. The results of the RVE give a overall effect size of 1.1, and that's depicted here. It's 1.1. So it's a value of 1.1 with a confidence interval from 0.396 to 1.81. And you can see here, the lower bound is here, 0.396 and 1.81. And the heterogeneity is high at 90.42 because it's on a 100-point scale. Finally, we have the Egger's regression test funnel plot. And essentially, an Egger's regression test, as I explained earlier in the methods, it's an estimation of publication bias, which is the bias that comes when you're trying to when you want to report positive results, because positive results get you grants, they get you publications. So there's a bias towards publishing positive results, and how much bias is there? Well, it's measured by how well it models the funnel plot. If it models the funnel plot well, it indicates minimal publication bias. So in this case, it roughly models the funnel plot, so it indicates, well, minimal publication bias in this meta-analysis, because the majority of data points follow the funnel structure. Now from the effect size here, G equals 1.1, we can see that this effect size is significant, and it strongly supports the hypothesis that dyslexia and gap detection are correlated with each other. This enhances the viability for gap detection hearing tests to serve as important early diagnosis, ensuring that children can receive effective treatment at pre-reading ages. These results also align with studies on dyslexia and its relationship with other traits, such as in frequency discrimination, Witten 2020, and rapid automatized naming, Araujo and Feiska 2019. And these two measures are well established as being related to dyslexia, so these similarities hint at a fundamental cause in dyslexia for all these deficits. Now there are some limitations with this project. Study quality was average overall, as study measures themselves were not standardized across selections. This meant that different studies could have different thresholds for methods of testing and inclusion of dyslexics. You can see this in the data table with Boas 2011 and McCroskey and Kidder. The RD threshold value for Boas is 0.522, while for Kidder it's 14.7. This is because there are different testing standards in the two studies, and therefore there's a huge difference in the threshold value. These differences create an element of unreliability, lowering quality overall. Nonetheless, study quality measures were still relatively effective, as study quality assessment ensured that certain elements were present in the studies, including clearly defined cutoff scores and methods, essential to a high-quality study. Some areas are still lacking though, most evidently in controlling for heterogeneity. High heterogeneity indicates variation in the data, often because of confounding factors. This is reinforced with the study quality measures, where it was found that many of the studies selected did not account for confounding factors when evaluating their data, and this overall lowered the accuracy of this meta-analysis. Potential next steps for this project are to expand to a broader scope of auditory deficits, including frequency and duration discrimination. These deficits can be explored in relation to dyslexia or to each other, furthering the goals of the current study to establish auditory deficits as basis for early diagnosis. Another possibility is going even wider, looking at how hearing and other deficits, such as phonological and memory deficits, are related. By establishing a connection between different aspects of the disorder, diagnosis and treatment are both improved. Better understanding of what really results from dyslexia ultimately leads to advancements in comprehensively treating the disorder. So here are some resources I read. They were fundamental in helping me structure my project. They effectively formed the basis of my understanding and development of my methodologies, and enhanced my data and analysis approach. And all images are by the author unless otherwise noted. Strengthening the foundations of dyslexia opens new avenues for detection and treatment, taking one step closer to defeating dyslexia.